Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of Teacher Talk. We are going through the book of Esther. We are on Esther chapter 3 today. And so chapter 3, verse 1 says, after these things, King Ahasuerus, or King Xerxes, promoted Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes who were with him. And all the king's servants who were within the king's gate bowed and paid homage to Haman, for so the king had commanded concerning him. But Mordecai would not bow or pay homage. So let's look at this for a minute. Haman is now second in command in the kingdom. All right, he's just under the king. He is the king's most trusted counselor, advisor, and he advises him on all things political and such. So Haman has been promoted now. He's a big man. He's pretty proud of himself. He thinks he's all that in a bag of chips. And the king has commanded that when Haman passes by, you bow and you pay homage to him. It was a sign of respect. Okay, it was a way, it's like a salute or something like that. So that was the law. That was what the king wished. But it says Mordecai would not bow or pay homage. And one of the reasons for that, probably the main reason, is that Mordecai was a Jew. And, God says, don't bow to any graven image. Don't bow to any other man. Don't, worship only me, worship only God. And in that day and time, if you bowed to something or someone, you were worshiping that God, that person or that thing. So Mordecai said, no, I'm not going to do that. He was objecting or disobeying based on his religious beliefs. Now, we hear a lot of that today. Well, that's against my religion, or that's against my religion. And today we have to take that into consideration. Otherwise, there'll be lawsuits and all kinds of protests and all that stuff going on. But back in this day, religious reasons were not a reason not to pay homage to the king or to any of the king's advisors. So verse 3 says, then the king's servants who were within the king's gate said to Mordecai, why do you transgress the king's command? So they're talking to him, the other servants in the palace and in the king's courtyard and stuff. They're asking him, why aren't you bowing? You're going to get in trouble. They all liked Mordecai. They respected Mordecai. He had a prominent position in the capital city. He had a prominent position in the outer court of the king, and nobody wanted to see him get in trouble. So that they kept asking him these questions. And in verse 4, it says, now it happened when they spoke to him daily. Okay, so this went on day after day after day after day, and he would not listen to them, that they told it to Haman. Okay, so now Haman is finding out about this to see whether Mordecai's words would stand. For Mordecai had told them that he was a Jew. So here now everybody knows it's religious objection. It's against my religion, yada, yada, yada. And so it finally just gets back to Haman, and they tell Haman. Well, when Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow or pay homage to him, Haman was filled with wrath. Okay, this was a personal insult to Haman. He couldn't look at it and say, you know what? I know you're loyal. I know you love the king, and I know you respect all the king's men. I know you respect me. We'll just let this go. Okay, if it is against your religion to bow to me, then salute me, or wave to me or something, but just show that you understand my authority and my position. Haman didn't do that. He took it personally. Well, how dare this Jew not bow down to me, Haman? So he was filled with wrath. But verse 6 says, he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had told him of the people of Mordecai. So they had told him that Mordecai was a Jew. So instead, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews who were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. the people of Mordecai. He says, it's not enough for me to get Mordecai out of the way. I got to get them all out of the way. Now, he's probably thinking something like, well, if Mordecai is going to do this, then, another Jew's going to do it, and another Jew's going to do it. And before you know it, all the Jews or none of the Jews are bowing down to me. And then it's going to spread to the kingdom, because they're going to say, well, if they don't have to do it, I don't have to do it. And Haman's just figuring out that this is just going to be a total collapse of respect for him in the whole kingdom. So he says, we got to get rid of all the Jews. So verse 7 says, in the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur, that is the lot. So this is like throwing dice, okay? They had either animal bones or little wooden or stone cubes with symbols on each side like dice. And they would throw these, and the way they landed would tell them what the god's will was. So they cast pur before Haman to determine the day and the month until it fell on the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. So what's going on? It is now the first month in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus. All right. So several years have passed since chapter 2. Okay, chapter 2, you remember between chapter 1 and chapter 2, there were 4 years. Then there was a year of purification and preparation for the virgins that they had brought in for the king. So that's another year. That's 5 years. And another 5 or so years have elapsed. About 4 years have elapsed between chapter 2 and chapter 3. So Esther's been queen now for about 4 years. And we have to remember that the book of Esther doesn't talk about events that happen over a few months. This is a 10-year period for the whole book of Esther. So he's now throwing lots. He's casting lots to find out when the gods want the Jews to be annihilated. And it falls on the 12th month, the month of Adar. He's in the first month. Okay. Now, according to our calendar, he's in about April of the current year. And the gods have said they want the Jews to be exterminated in March of the following year. So we've got another year now tacked on to this 9-year period before the Jews are going to be executed. So everything that takes place between now and the end of the book is a year. Okay. So he's got the date. So then in verse 8, it says, Haman said to King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people. He's going to the king. He says, there's a certain people, doesn't say who they are, scattered and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from all other peoples, and they do not keep the king's laws. Now, he's lying a little bit here. They do keep the king's laws. It's just they won't bow to him. He's taking this personal affront, personal insult, and he's making it a matter of an insult to the king, okay, because he's trying to get what he wants. Therefore, it is not fitting for the king to let them remain. Now, at this point, he could have said, you need to kick them all out of the kingdom. See, that would have been a better solution than what he's about to propose. He says, if it pleases the king, let a decree be written that they be destroyed. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who do the work to bring it into the king's treasury. So what he's saying is, I will pay for the men who do this dastardly deed. And he said, everything that these people own will be brought into the treasuries of the king. So he's making it profitable for the king to annihilate these people. So the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. And the king said to Haman, the money and the people are given to you. Do with them as seems good to you. He says, okay, you got the money, you've got my signet ring so you can make the law, and whatever you get from these people, you do whatever you want to with it. So then the king's scribes were called on the 13th day of the first month, and a decree was written according to all that Haman commanded, to the king's satraps, to the governors who were over each province, to the officials of all people, to every province according to its script, just like the one about men are the king of their own household and such. And to every people in their language, in the name of King Ahasuerus, it was written, and sealed with the king's signet ring. And the letters were sent by couriers into all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all the Jews, both young and old, little children and women. This was a total mass annihilation of an entire race of people. In one day, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their possessions. A copy of the document was to be issued as law in every province, being published for all people, that they should be ready for that day. The couriers were sent out, hastened by the king's command, and the decree was proclaimed in Shushan, the citadel. So the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Shushan was perplexed. So confusion started spreading throughout the city. Why? These Jews weren't dissidents, they weren't protesters, they followed all the king's laws, they some of them, had businesses. People are thinking, man, I go and buy bread from his bakery every day. Why is he going to be killed? What did he do? She does all of my sewing for me. Why are they going to be killed? So the whole city is confused. This proclamation doesn't say why the Jews are to be killed. It just says they're going to be killed. And so it's a confusing for the Jews, of course. What have we done? And it's confusing for the other residents of the kingdom. And so for the next year, there's all these questions and thoughts of, why is this happening and why is this going on? And it throws the city into unrest, I guess is the best way to put it. Everybody's just walking around thinking, why? And obviously it's not bothering Haman, and it doesn't appear to be bothering the king, because it says the king and Haman sat down to drink. They went on life as usual, business as usual. It didn't bother the king that he was going to eradicate a whole race of people. And of course, at this time now, and we're going to see in chapter 4 here in a minute, that nobody knows that Esther is a Jew. And so that's going to be another wrinkle in this plan. So let's go on into chapter 4, I'm sorry. It says, when Mordecai learned all that had happened, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes and went out into the midst of the city. And he cried with a loud and bitter cry. So this is a sign of utter anguish and sadness and grief. He's like, oh my gosh, what? He's probably thinking, what have I done? Just because I don't bow down to him, just because I remain true to my God and his commandments, now all my people are going to be killed. So he's probably feeling a little guilty about all this, I would think. And now there's nothing he can do about it. So it says, he went as far as the front of the king's gate, for no one might enter the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. So he couldn't go into the inner courtyard. And in every province where the king's command and decree arrived, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting and weeping and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. So a lot of the Jews are doing the same thing. They're weeping and wailing and wearing sackcloth and ashes and crying out to God, why, God, why is this happening? So Esther's maids and eunuchs, they know that Mordecai is her father. He raised her as his daughter. And they see that he's upset. They know that she's going to want to know that he's upset. So Esther's maids and eunuchs in verse 4 came and told her. And the queen was deeply distressed, obviously, understandably. Then she sent garments to clothe Mordecai and take his sackcloth away from him, but he would not accept them. Then Esther called Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, whom he had appointed to attend her. So this is her personal eunuch. And she gave him a command concerning Mordecai to learn what and why this was. What's going on? Why is he doing this? So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the city square that was in front of the king's gate, and Mordecai told him all that had happened to him and the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasuries to destroy the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the written decree for their destruction, which was given at Shushan, that he might show it to Esther and explain it to her, and that he might command her to go into the king to make supplication to him and plead before him for her people. So Hathach returned and told Esther the words of Mordecai. Mordecai says, you got to take this to her. You got to let her read it. You got to tell her she's got to go in and talk to the king and plead for her people. And then Esther spoke to Hathach and gave him a command for Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that any man or woman who goes into the inner court of the king, who has not been called, he has but one law: put all to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter, that he may live. Yet I myself have not been called to go to the king these 30 days. So they told Mordecai Esther's words. She says, look, everybody here knows, everybody in the province, in the kingdom knows, if you walk into the king's chamber, the king's throne room, more or less, without being called by the king, you will be put to death unless the king holds out his royal scepter. And then your life is spared. She says, I haven't been called in 30 days. If I walk in there, he could kill me. And then, what good would I be? So she's afraid, understandably so. She is the queen. She doesn't have any special rights or privileges beyond just being the queen and being the number one woman in the kingdom. She doesn't have any other special rights and privileges. She doesn't have a revolving charge account at Neiman Marcus, and she doesn't have, she doesn't have all of these perks that the king has. The king can basically do whatever he wants. The queen can't do that. So if she wants to see the king, but he hasn't called her, she can't just go barging in there. So Mordecai told Hathach to answer Esther, do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. If you think that you're not going to be killed in this annihilation, you got another thing coming. Anybody ever tell you that? You got another thing coming. He's telling her, you got another thing coming. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and a deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. He said, if God wants to save our people, he's going to save our people, whether you say something or not. But if you don't say something, you're going to die. He says, yet, who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? He says, how do you know, young lady? Now, she's probably 18 years old by now, roughly. How do you know that God didn't make you queen for this very reason? This is a key verse of Esther. Who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? This is the reason you were made queen. And now you're going to turn your back on it. God made you queen so that you could save your people, and yet you're not going to say anything. So it gets Esther to thinking. She's thinking about it now. She hasn't said she'll do it, but she's thinking about it. Verse 15 says, then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go and gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan and fast for me. Neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will fast likewise, and so I will go to the king, which is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. So she says, all right, look, you and all the Jews in the kingdom, fast for 3 days and 3 nights. I don't know if I could do that, folks. Sometimes I can skip a meal, maybe 2 in one day, but at some point my stomach starts thinking my throat's been cut, and I'll eat, cardboard if I have to, just to get something in my stomach. And that's why I have such a large stomach. But she says, fast for 3 days and 3 nights. She says, me and my servants, because her servants were probably all Jews as well, or a great deal of them. We're going to do the same thing. We're not going to eat or drink for 3 days and 3 nights. We're going to inquire of the Lord. And unless he says no, unless he tells me otherwise, I will go to the king, which is against the law. And if I die, I die. That's faith. That's conviction. He made her think. He said, look, you were made queen for this. How do you know you weren't made queen for this? You've got to take a chance. And she says, you know what? You're right. Unless God tells me no during this fast, I'll go into the king. And if he kills me, he kills me. So that's the kind of faith that we need to have. We need to say, when we don't know what to do, but we think we might know what to do, we need to, number one, we need to inquire of the Lord. We need to go into prayer and fasting. Say, Lord, is this what you want me to do? Tell me if this is the right course of action. And if you don't get a clear, definitive, distinct direction from the Lord not to do it, then you need to do it. And you need to say, you know what, Lord, if it works, it works. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But I'm going to do this, and I'm going to depend on you. So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther commanded him. So then chapter 5, we're going to try and get this one in today as well. It says it happened on the 3rd day. So this is after the 3 days of fasting. On the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace across from the king's house, while the king sat on his royal throne in the royal house facing the entrance of the house. So he's sitting on his throne. He's facing the front door. She's just outside the front door. Out there, she's kind of, all right, here we go, Lord, just, you didn't tell me no. So, here goes. So it was when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court that she found favor in his sight. And the king held out his royal scepter that was in his hand. And Esther went near and touched the top of the scepter. So the king hasn't seen her in 30 days. And he sees her and he says, oh, there's my beautiful bride. I've missed her. I want to talk to her. I want to see her. So he holds out the royal scepter and she comes in. So she's in. She's not going to be killed. And the king said to her, what do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you up to half the kingdom. He said, I'll give you anything you want, up to and including half of my kingdom. He loved her this much. He was devoted to Esther. He's basically saying, whatever I have is yours. All you got to do is ask for it. And I'm thinking that 30 days that he hadn't called her was all part of God's plan as well. God was creating a hunger in the king's heart for Esther and keeping him busy and keeping him distracted so that when he sees Esther, he's like, oh, man, I've forgotten all about my lovely, beautiful young bride. And he's eager to see her, and he's eager to say, hey, I saw you out there waiting. I know you want something. Whatever you want, it's yours. So that was all part of God's plan too. And like I said in the beginning, we don't see God distinctly, specifically mentioned in this book, but you see the way God manipulates events and orchestrates things behind the scenes. And he does the same thing in our lives today. If we're only willing to look and see those times that he is pulling all the strings. So he says, you can have up to half the kingdom. So Esther answered, if it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet that I prepared for him. She said, I want to have you for lunch, and bring Haman. He's your most trusted advisor. He's your second in command. Bring him too. I want him to enjoy the lunch. And the king said, bring Haman quickly, that he may do as Esther has said. So the king and Haman went to the banquet that Esther had prepared. So she fixes lunch for him. They go to her quarters and they have lunch. And Haman thinks, hey, this is cool. I'm getting in good with the queen now too. And, everything's going good. And it says in verse 6, at the banquet of wine, the king said to Esther, what is your petition? What do you want? He said, whatever you want, it shall be granted to you. What is your request? Up to half the kingdom, it shall be done. And this king is, like I said, he's devoted to her. He says, whatever you want. So that kind of opens the door for her. And then Esther answered and said, my petition and request is this. If I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, then let the king and Haman come to the banquet which I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king has said. Excuse me, let me get a cup of coffee here. So she says, look, you came to the banquet today. I hope you're enjoying yourself. I want you to come tomorrow again, and I'm going to prepare you another banquet, and I'll tell you what I want then. So the king says, okay, let's do that. So it says, Haman went out that day joyful and with a glad heart. He's thinking, yeah, I'm getting in good with the queen now. I'm gonna go places. My career is just taking off. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, and that he did not stand or tremble before him, he was filled with indignation against Mordecai. You ever notice how you can be having a really great day, and just that one thing that happens or that one person you see can just ruin your day? That's what's happening here. Haman comes out of the queen's banquet. He's like, man, I got a full belly. I've had good wine. I've been in the company of the king and the queen. I've been waited on by servants. My career is just taking off. Oh man, there's Mordecai. Oh, that old so-and-so. He's just a thorn in my side. He's a pimple on the face of my career. But it says, nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home, and he sent and called for his friends and his wife Zeresh. Then Haman told them of his great riches, the multitude of his children, everything in which the king had promoted him, and how he had advanced him above the officials of the servants of the king. My family, he says, I am the second most powerful man in this kingdom. I am. You remember what happened to Nebuchadnezzar when he started saying, look what I've done. I built this kingdom, and I've done this, and I've done this. God brought him down, didn't he? God made him roam the earth like an animal for 7 years. And the Bible says that pride goeth before a fall. We got to watch out about getting prideful. We got to watch out about taking credit for things that God has done in our life. Because when we start taking credit for things that God has done in our life, God's going to get our attention. So it says, moreover, Haman said, besides, Queen Esther invited no one but me to come in with the king to the banquet that she prepared. And tomorrow I am again invited by her along with the king. So I had lunch with Queen Esther. She invited me. She didn't invite anybody else but the king and me. And she said, come back tomorrow, we'll do it again. Yet all this avails me nothing so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. He just irks me. He gets on my last nerve. Verse 14 says, then his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, let a gallows be made, 50 cubits high, 75 feet, and in the morning suggest to the king that Mordecai be hanged on it. Then go merrily with the king to the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman. So he had the gallows made. So his wife, all of his friends that he had there boasting to, they said, hey, if this Mordecai is such a bad guy, if he is ruining your life, sweetie, then you need to make an example of him. And you need to build a gallows big enough so that everybody in the city can see it no matter where they are. And you need to request to the king that he be hanged on that gallows as an example for everybody in the kingdom. And maybe that'll make you feel better, honey. And Haman thought, yeah, that'll make me feel better. So he had the gallows made. So now the workers are out there working on the gallows, and Mordecai is just, wringing his hands and laughing that evil, laughing that evil laugh that the bad guys do in the movies. And he's thinking, I'll get rid of Mordecai. In a few months, I'll get rid of all of his people, and then everybody will live happily ever after, and the king will be eternally grateful to me, and maybe one day, who knows, maybe I'll be king. So everything's going great for Haman. We're going to stop right there. We're going to pick up Esther chapter 5. Esther chapter 6 in the next video, and see what happens with Haman. And Esther is a pretty smart cookie. She's pretty shrewd. She knows a little bit about manipulating people. And she knows that Haman is a bad dude. And she knows that her people are in trouble. But she's kind of got a streak of Haman in her, in that, Haman wants to make Mordecai a public example, wants Mordecai and the Jews to be publicly humiliated. She's thinking, I want this to be really painful for Haman, and I want everybody to know what a jerk Haman is. So she's formulating this plan in her mind, and she's fixing it so that everybody's going to know that Haman was not who he thought he was and who he told everybody he was. So as we continue through the book of Esther, look for the ways that God manipulates and God orchestrates things. And then look at your life and think, you know what? Back when such and such was going on, and I thought it was the end of the world, but it all worked out better than I could have ever expected. That's when God was working in my life. That's when God was orchestrating things. That's when he was, pushing buttons and pulling levers and turning dials and stuff behind the curtain that I couldn't see. And it was making everything happen just the way he wanted it to happen in order to bless me. And I think you'll find a lot of times in your life where if you examine them in that light, you can see God's hand in a lot of different situations in your life. And thank God that he does that. And thank God that he doesn't always tell us what's going to happen, because I think if he told us what's going to happen, we might not go the direction he wants us to go. We may make it a harder journey than it should be. Sometimes I think he has to drag us kicking and screaming to get us to the point where he wants us to be. And then once we get there, we're like, oh yeah, this is pretty cool. There's a story about a guy, he was out hiking or something, and he was going along a cliff edge, and he slipped. He lost his footing and he fell. And on his way, he fell a few feet, and there was a tree root sticking out of the side of this cliff, and he grabbed that tree root, and he's hanging there, and he's thinking, Lord, help me, and somebody help me. And he hears this voice from heaven, and this voice says, what can I do for you? And he says, God, is that you? And he says, yes. What do you need? He said, Lord, just get me out of this situation. The Lord just said, let go. And he said, are you kidding, Lord? This cliff is thousands of feet high. He said, I'm going to die if I let go. Can't you bring somebody along with a rope, or can't you reach down and pull me up, do a little anti-gravity thing or something, get me back on the trail? And God says, let go. And he says, Lord, I can't let go. And he argues with God back and forth for a while. And God keeps saying, let go. And he keeps saying, I can't let go. I can't let go. I can't do that. And finally, he just loses his grip. He says, all right, Lord, he said, I'm going to come see you in just a few seconds here, because I'm going to fall, I'm going to die. And he lets go and he falls about 2 feet. And he lands on a protrusion, a projection, a little plateau that's about 2 feet under him. And he falls and he sits around and he looks up, and he says, oh, okay, that wasn't so bad. And that's what we do in our life sometimes. God takes us to a situation and we don't like being in that situation. And we say, Lord, get me out of this situation. And God says, just let go. And we're like, no, I can't do that, Lord. Or God says, do this or do that. And we say, I can't do that. And finally, when we do it, it ends up being okay. Look for those times when God is manipulating and orchestrating your life. And make a promise to God that you'll try harder to see those times, and you'll try harder to be faithful in those times, and see if he doesn't work in your life in a great and mighty way. If you have any prayer requests, if you want to contact me for any reason, I've been having a little trouble getting a email account that's going to work for me. I finally got one. It's asktheteacher628@gmail.com. That's asktheteacher, all one word, all lowercase, asktheteacher628@gmail.com. Make sure if you haven't already subscribed to this channel, make sure you subscribe, hit the little bell icon so you can see when new videos are released. I'm going to try to do videos once a week, usually around 2 o'clock on Wednesday afternoon. So check back after 2 o'clock on Wednesday and see if there's a new video. If there's not a new video, then things have just gotten crazy, and I'll try to get one out as soon as I can. But if you hit that little bell icon, you'll get a notification saying, hey, there's a new video on Teacher Talk with Vernon. I hope you guys are enjoying this. I hope you're enjoying going through the book of Esther. And until we see you next time, God bless you, and there we go.